The dust of redemption, Texas, settled on everything, a fine red powder that tasted of grit and failed prayers. It coated Eleanor Vance's worn traveling dress, clung to her eyelashes, and settled in the creases of the telegram crumpled in her fist. Arthur Kincaid, deceased. Accident. The words were as blunt and brutal as the landscape. In her other hand, the marriage contract felt like a cruel joke, its hopeful script promising a life that had been extinguished before it could even begin. Time to go, ma'am. The stagecoach driver's voice was impatient, his hand already on the door of the rickety coach that was her only link back to a world she could no longer call home. He's right, Miss Vance. Sheriff Thompson shifted his weight, the star on his chest catching the merciless glare of the afternoon sun. He was a man built of soft compromises, his face etched with a practiced concern that didn't reach his eyes. There's nothing for you here now. I've spoken with the driver. Your return passage is arranged. A kindness. A kindness. Eleanor almost laughed. A kindness would have been a letter, not a telegram. A kindness would have been a world where a woman wasn't forced to travel 1,000 miles to marry a man she'd only known through 3 carefully worded letters, her entire future packed into a single worn trunk. She looked past the sheriff, at the silent, sun-bleached building that should have been her new home. Kincaid Smithy. The painted letters were faded, peeling in the heat. It looked as dead as its owner. No, she said. The word was quiet, yet it cut through the air with the finality of a hammer strike. The sheriff blinked. Ma'am, I said no. Eleanor straightened her shoulders, a simple gesture that felt like an act of war. She smoothed the marriage contract, its clauses now her only armor. My agreement with Mr. Kincaid was clear. We were to be partners. The contract states that in the event of his death, proprietorship of the smithy and its attached residence transfers to me. Sheriff Thompson's jaw tightened. He exchanged a look with the stagecoach driver, a flicker of annoyance passing between them. That's highly irregular. It's a blacksmith shop, Miss Vance. No place for a woman. My father was a blacksmith, she stated, her voice devoid of emotion. He taught me the trade before he passed. I can work the forge. This declaration was met with a thick, disbelieving silence. The few townspeople who had been watching the quiet drama from the shade of the general store porch now stared openly. A woman blacksmith? The idea was as foreign and unwelcome as a sudden snowstorm in July. Now see here, the sheriff began, his tone shifting from patronizing to stern. I'm not going back, Sheriff, Eleanor interrupted, her gaze unwavering. I have no home to go back to. My family believes me to be a married woman. I have $17 to my name. This smithy is all I have. I will not be kindly sent away from it. Defeated by a resolve he hadn't expected, the sheriff sighed, a puff of red dust rising from his vest. He pulled a ring of keys from his pocket and thrust them into her hand. The small door leads to the residence. Don't expect a welcome from this town, Miss Vance. Arthur was a good man, but redemption doesn't take kindly to irregularities. With a final, disapproving nod, he turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the oppressive silence. The stagecoach driver spat into the dust, slammed the coach door, and with a crack of his whip, rumbled out of town, taking her last chance of escape with him. The key turned in the lock with a rusty groan. The air inside Arthur Kincaid's home was still and close, smelling of coal dust, old tobacco, and loneliness. It was a simple, masculine space. A sturdy table with one chair, a pipe resting in an ashtray, a well-worn leather apron slung over the back of the chair as if he had just taken it off. For a moment, the grief she'd been holding at bay washed over her, not for the man, whom she'd never met, but for the life he represented. Safety, partnership, a place to finally stop running. Her eyes scanned the room, looking for some piece of the man who had penned such gentle, hopeful letters. A small shelf held a handful of books. She ran her fingers over their spines, and it was there, tucked between a book of poetry and a farmer's almanac, that she saw it. A heavy, leather-bound Bible. A sense of obligation, of finality, compelled her to open it. And inside, nestled between the pages of the Old Testament, was a single, unopened letter. The envelope was thick, the handwriting on it hurried and slightly frantic. It was addressed to Arthur, postmarked from the next county over, dated just a week before the telegram had announced his death. A chill traced its way down Eleanor's spine. Why hadn't he opened it? She held the letter, the paper heavy with unspoken words, when a shadow fell across the doorway. She looked up, startled, to see a man filling the frame. He was tall and broad, dressed in the expensive but practical attire of a successful rancher. His hair was silver at the temples, and his smile was a carefully constructed thing that didn't quite mask the predatory glint in his eyes. "Jedediah Kane," he said, removing his hat. "A pleasure to meet you, ma'am, though I wish it were under happier circumstances." "The whole town mourns Arthur, Miss Vance," Eleanor corrected, her hand instinctively closing around the letter. "Of course, I own the Circle K, the ranch just east of town," he continued, his gaze sweeping over the small residence, assessing its worth in a single glance. "I came to offer my condolences, and a proposition. I know a lone woman can't have any use for a blacksmith shop. I'd be willing to take it off your hands. A fair price, of course, to help you get back on your feet and on your way." His offer was slick with a false generosity she recognized all too well. It was the voice of men who saw vulnerability as an opportunity. "The smithy is not for sale, Mr. Kane," she said, her voice cool. "I intend to work it myself." Kane's smile faltered. "I see. A woman of conviction." He replaced his hat, the friendly mask slipping to reveal the cold calculation beneath. "It's a hard life out here, Miss Vance. Redemption can be unforgiving, especially for outsiders who don't know their place." The veiled threat hung in the air between them. "You have a good day now." He was gone as quickly as he appeared, leaving Eleanor with a renewed sense of unease. Kane's immediate and aggressive offer, coupled with the sheriff's eagerness for her to leave, felt like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't yet see. All day, as she took stock of the smithy, the forge, the tools, the quenching trough, she felt eyes on her. Not the overt stares of the townspeople, but a more subtle, constant observation. From the deep shadows of the alley across the street, a figure watched. He was lean and still, his features obscured by distance and the brim of a worn hat. The townspeople gave him a wide berth, their body language a mixture of fear and disdain. She recognized him from the whispered comment she'd overheard. Silas, the half-breed tracker. He never moved, never approached, just watched, his silence more unnerving than Kane's open hostility. As evening fell, casting long, distorted shadows across the dusty street, Eleanor sat at Arthur's table, the unopened letter lying before her. The weight of her decision to stay pressed down on her. She was an outsider, a woman in a man's world, with a powerful enemy and a silent, watching specter. Her hand trembled as she picked up the letter. The wax seal was unbroken. With a deep breath, she slid her finger beneath the flap and tore it open. The paper inside was cheap, the script hurried. It wasn't a letter in any traditional sense. There was a crudely drawn map of what looked like a river bend. Below it, a string of numbers that meant nothing to her, 30 to 25. And beneath that, a single, chilling phrase. The ink bled slightly as if written with a shaking hand. "The water is the blood, and the blood is on his hands." A cold dread washed over her. This wasn't a casual note. It was a warning. It was a secret. Arthur Kincaid hadn't died in an accident. He had been silenced. She looked up, her heart pounding, her gaze drawn to the window of the smithy. Across the street, the alley was no longer empty. Silas had stepped out from the shadows. He stood directly under the fading light of the setting sun, and he was staring right at her, his face unreadable, his eyes fixed on her as if he knew. As if he had been waiting for her to finally read the dead man's last testament. The sun rose with a vengeance, baking the dust of redemption into a hard, cracked shell. Eleanor awoke on a simple cot in the back of the residence, the cryptic words of the letter echoing in her mind. "The water is the blood." She stepped outside into the morning glare, intending to inspect the smithy's quenching trough, and froze. It was in ruins. The heavy wooden planks had been shattered. The iron hoops burst. A dark, muddy patch on the ground was all that remained of the water it had held. It was a calculated act of destruction, disguised as simple vandalism, aimed directly at the heart of her trade. A blacksmith without water was as useless as a farmer without seed. A cold, hard anger displaced the fear that had kept her awake all night. Kane? This was his answer to her refusal. This was his warning. She looked across the street to the shaded alley. Silas was gone. The town was still quiet, but she felt its eyes on her, watching, waiting for her to break, to pack her trunk and board the next stagecoach. Instead, she turned and walked into the forge. She found the heavy leather apron Arthur had left, its surface scarred and softened with use, and tied it around her waist. It felt like donning armor. She worked the bellows, her movements stiff at first, then more certain, coaxing the embers in the forge back to life. A plume of dark smoke rose from the smithy's chimney, a signal to the entire town. A declaration. The sound of her hammer striking anvil a short time later was her response to their intimidation. It rang out through the morning stillness, sharp and defiant. I am still here. I am not leaving. Her first task was a simple one, straightening a bent plowshare for a nervous farmer who had come to the edge of town seeking out Arthur's services, unaware of his death. The man watched her work, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and awe as she heated the metal to a glowing orange, drew it from the coals, and reshaped it with sure, practiced blows. The work was demanding, the heat searing, the physical toll immediate. But with every strike, Eleanor felt a piece of her own resolve being forged, hardened in the fire. When the job was done, the farmer paid her with a quiet, "Thank you, ma'am," and scurried away, as if afraid to be seen doing business with her. With the coins in her pocket, Eleanor's first stop was the sheriff's office. Thompson was leaning back in his chair, boots propped on his desk, cleaning his fingernails with a pocket knife. He didn't bother to stand when she entered. "Sheriff, my water trough was destroyed last night," she said, dispensing with pleasantries. He sighed, a long, weary sound of manufactured patience. "Vandals, I expect, drifters passing through. It was a targeted act, meant to stop me from working." "Now, Miss Vance, you can't know that," he said, his tone condescending. "Could have been a stray steer from Kane's herd. They wander into town sometimes. Known to be clumsy beasts. A steer splintered 3-inch thick oak planks. You'd be surprised what a spooked animal can do." He closed his knife with a decisive snap, a clear dismissal. "I'll keep an eye out, but there's not much I can do. My advice is to accept Mr. Kane's generous offer and save yourself the trouble." The confirmation of his complicity was so blatant it left her breathless. She left without another word, the closed door on the law as solid as the one on her past. Back at the smithy, she stared at the wreckage of the trough, the challenge feeling insurmountable. "That wood's too green. It'll warp and split before the season's out." The voice came from behind her, low and quiet. Eleanor turned to find Silas standing there. He had moved with the silence of a shadow. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the hard set of his jaw. He carried himself with a stillness that was not passive, but coiled, like a predator at rest. "I'll have to make do with what I can find," she said, her tone defensive. He shook his head, his gaze fixed on the broken wood. "Kane's men, 2 of them, saw him from my place late last night." His directness was startling. "Will you tell the sheriff?" A short, humorless laugh escaped him. "The sheriff knows. My word is worth less than the dust on his boots in this town." He paused, his dark eyes meeting hers. "But I know a place. An old oak, struck by lightning 2 winters ago. Wood seasoned hard, perfect for a trough." He gestured with his chin toward the hills. "I can show you." It was an offer of help, but more than that, it was an offer of alliance from the only other person in redemption who seemed to exist outside its suffocating hierarchy. "Why?" she asked. Silas shrugged, his gaze drifting back to the smithy, where the smoke still rose from the chimney. "Because my father taught me you don't let a good forge go cold." The work of rebuilding the trough became their first real conversation. They spoke little, but a language of shared labor passed between them. The rhythm of a saw, the heft of a plank, the satisfying thud of the mallet driving pegs into place. Silas moved with an economy of motion, his knowledge of wood and grain as intuitive as her own knowledge of metal. In the heat of the afternoon, seeking a moment's shade in the forge, Eleanor made a decision. She trusted the certainty of this man's hands, the quiet truth in his eyes. She retrieved the letter from its hiding place and handed it to him. He took it, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle on the fragile paper. He read the cryptic phrase, his expression unchanging, but a new stillness settled over him as he studied the crude drawing of the river bend. "The Spirit Spring," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He traced the lines of the drawing with his finger. "It is a sacred place to my people, a place of healing. They say its water has never run dry, even in the worst droughts." He looked up, his eyes dark with a history she couldn't begin to fathom. "The town's river is fed by this spring. Or it was. The water level has been dropping for 2 years now, ever since Kane finished buying up all the land along the North Ridge. The The water is the blood. The phrase echoed in Eleanor's mind, now laced with a more sinister meaning. And the numbers? She asked, pointing to the 30 to 25 scrawled on the paper. Silas shook his head. A survey marker, perhaps, or a map coordinate. Arthur must have been investigating the water. The pieces were beginning to fit, forming a picture of greed and corruption as vast as the prairie itself. Cain wasn't just a bully, he was slowly bleeding the town dry, and Arthur Kincaid had discovered how. Later that day, Eleanor realized she was out of salt, a basic necessity she couldn't do without. Steeling herself, she walked to the general store, the bell above the door announcing her presence like a judgment. The store was the domain of Harriet Blackwood, the mayor's wife, a woman whose sharp eyes missed nothing. Two other women were at the counter, their hushed conversation stopping the moment they saw Eleanor. The silence was thick with unspoken accusations. As Eleanor waited, her gaze fell upon a calendar hanging on the wall. The date of Arthur's death was circled in black. It was then that she caught a snippet of the women's renewed whispers, a fragment not meant for her ears. A terrible shame. Found him all the way out by the old Comanche spring. Must have been his horse threw him. So far from the main trail. Sheriff said he must have been disoriented. Eleanor's blood ran cold. The Comanche spring. The spirit spring. The same spot from the drawing in the letter. She turned, and the women fell silent, their faces a mixture of fear and pity. They knew. The whole town knew and was too terrified to speak. She paid for her salt and walked out of the store, the weight of the truth settling upon her like a burial shroud. Arthur Kincaid hadn't gotten lost. He hadn't been thrown from his horse. He had been murdered at the exact place he was investigating. His death a brutal message to anyone else who dared to look too closely at the town's dying river. Sleep offered no escape. Eleanor was haunted by the image of Arthur Kincaid, a man she'd never met, lying broken and alone at the sacred spring. The letter, now feeling like Arthur's last will and testament, lay hidden beneath a loose floorboard, its secrets a dangerous weight in the silent cabin. She woke in the dead of night to a sound outside, the soft crunch of a boot on the dusty ground. Moving with the stealth of a field mouse, she peered through a crack in the window shutters. A man stood in the shadows cast by the moonlight, one of Cain's ranch hands. He wasn't doing anything, just watching, a sentinel of intimidation posted to remind her she was not safe. This was no longer just about sabotage, it was surveillance. Her defiance had made her a target. Before dawn, she was at Silas's cabin. It was a small, solitary structure at the very edge of town, as much a part of the wilderness as the man himself. He opened the door before she knocked, a rifle held loosely in one hand, his senses clearly attuned to the slightest disturbance. He was murdered, she said, the words a stark whisper in the pre-dawn chill. At the spring. I have to see it for myself. Silas's expression was grim, but unsurprised. Cain's men are watching the trails now. It's too dangerous in daylight. Then we go at night, she countered, her resolve unshakable. You know the land. You can guide me. He studied her face in the pale light, seeing a determination that matched his own. Get some rest, he said finally. Be ready an hour after moonrise. The journey that night was a tense, silent passage through a landscape of silver and shadow. Silas moved with a fluid grace, his feet making almost no sound on the rocky terrain. He led her away from the main trails, through hidden ravines and stands of gnarled mesquite that clawed at her clothes. The moon was a sliver in the sky, offering just enough light to see the path, but leaving the shadows deep and menacing. It was in one of these moments, as they paused to listen for the telltale sound of riders, that Silas spoke, his voice a low rumble. My father died defending this land, he said, his gaze fixed on the dark ridge ahead. Not this exact spot, but places like it. He believed the springs were the heart of the earth. He said if you listened closely, you could hear its heartbeat in the water. What happened to him? Eleanor asked softly. Settlers came, said a piece of paper signed by a man in a faraway city gave him the right to the water. My father disagreed. Silas's voice was devoid of self-pity, a simple statement of a brutal fact. They called him a savage, shot him where he stood, for trying to protect his home. The shared grief forged a new, deeper connection between them. They were both children of men who had died for their convictions, seeking a justice that seemed as distant as the stars above. We'll find the truth for Arthur, Eleanor vowed, and for your father. The spirit spring was hidden in a small, rocky canyon, a place that felt ancient and alive. Even in the dim moonlight, Eleanor could see its magic. Water bubbled up from the earth, clear and impossibly pure, pooling in a turquoise basin before flowing onward to become the river that fed redemption. It was a place of profound peace, a peace shattered by what they found next. Silas knelt, his fingers tracing marks in the dried mud near the pool's edge. Signs of a struggle, he murmured. 2 men, one heavier, Kane's foreman. I'd wager. The other, lighter. Arthur. Eleanor's gaze swept the surrounding rocks. Arthur had been a methodical man. His letters had been precise. His plans practical. He wouldn't have come here without a purpose. The numbers from the letter, she said, her eyes scanning the rock faces. They have to be here somewhere. They found them carved discreetly on the underside of a rock ledge, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. 30 to 25. Not a single set of numbers, but a series of them, like a surveyor's marks, mapping a perimeter. Arthur had been documenting the boundary of Kane's theft. A sound from the canyon entrance made them both freeze, the clatter of a horseshoe on rock, followed by the low murmur of voices. Kane's patrol. This way, Silas whispered, pulling her into a narrow crevice behind a curtain of old vines. They pressed themselves flat against the cold stone, their breath held tight in their chests. 2 riders entered the clearing, their figures silhouetted against the moonlit sky. Eleanor could hear their coarse laughter, the squeak of their saddle leather. They were so close she could smell the whiskey on their breath. Nothing here, one of them said, his voice slurring slightly. Told you Kane was getting spooked over nothing. He pays us to look. So we look, the other replied. Just be glad for the easy money. They lingered for what felt like an eternity before finally turning their horses and riding away. Only when the sound of their hoofbeats had completely faded did Silas and Eleanor emerge from their hiding place. The close call left them both trembling, the reality of their danger now a cold, hard knot in their stomachs. Back in the relative safety of the smithy, the first hint of dawn was streaking the sky. They were exhausted, but adrenaline still coursed through their veins. The numbers must mean something more. Eleanor insisted, staring at the transcription she had made. Not just survey marks. Arthur was a man of faith. The letter was in his Bible. Silas watched her, a new thought dawning in his eyes. In his Bible, he repeated slowly. He picked up the heavy leather book from the table. What if the numbers aren't a map coordinate? What if they're a reference? Eleanor's breath caught. She took the Bible, her fingers fumbling slightly as she searched for the table of contents. 30. The 30th book? Job. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the thin pages. Chapter 30, verse 25. Her finger traced the line of text, and she read the words aloud, her voice a hushed whisper. He bideth the floods from overflowing, and the thing that is hid bringeth he forth to light. It was Arthur's final, desperate message. A clue. Silas leaned closer, his eyes scanning the page. And then he saw it, tucked so tightly between the pages that it was almost invisible, was another, smaller piece of folded paper. A sliver of white against the cream-colored page. With the delicate precision of a surgeon, Eleanor used the tip of a knife to work it free. It was a formal document, a legal deposition, signed and dated just 2 days before Arthur's death. The name at the bottom made her gasp. Elias Thorne, Territorial Land Surveyor. The text was a confession. It detailed, in precise, legalistic terms, how Jedediah Kane had hired Thorne to illegally redraw the property lines around the Spirit Spring, creating a new deed that diverted the water rights to Kane's ranch. It was all there. The bribery, the forged documents, the systematic theft of the town's lifeblood. They had it, the proof, the weapon they needed to bring a corrupt and powerful man to justice. They had the thing that was hid, and now, it was their duty to bring it forth to light. The surveyor's deposition felt like a cannonball in Eleanor's hands, heavy, powerful, and capable of immense destruction. But a cannonball was useless without a cannon. The law and redemption was a broken tool, wielded by the very man they sought to expose. Sheriff Thompson would sooner arrest them for possessing the document than act on its contents. As if Kane could sense their victory, his retaliation was swift and terrifying. In the dead of night, a new smell filled the smithy, not of coal or metal, but of smoke, acrid and hungry. Eleanor awoke with a start to a hellish orange glow flickering outside her window. The small stable behind the smithy, where Arthur had kept his horse, was engulfed in flames. She and Silas managed to douse the blaze before it could spread to the main building, using buckets of water from the newly repaired trough. But the message was as clear as the flames against the night sky. I can destroy everything you have. I can burn you to the ground. He's getting desperate, Silas said, his face grimed with soot as they stared at the smoldering ruins the next morning. He knows we're close to the truth. We have the proof, but no way to use it, Eleanor said, the frustration a bitter taste in her mouth. We're trapped? Not entirely. Silas's gaze turned eastward. There are rumors. A federal marshal is in the territory, a man named Garrett. He's been investigating land fraud cases over in the Panhandle. If we can get this deposition to him, he's our only hope. How do we find him? Silver Creek, Silas replied. It's the county seat. It has a telegraph office. If a marshal is in the area, he'll check in there. He paused, the weight of his next words heavy in the air. It's a 2-day ride. A hard one, and Kane's men will be watching the roads. The risks were enormous, but the alternative, waiting for Kane to make his next move, was a death sentence. As Eleanor began to prepare for the journey, packing what little food they had, a quiet knock came at the smithy's back door. It was Mrs. Miller, the doctor's wife, a woman who usually faded into the town's background like a pale watercolor. Her face was etched with a new, fierce anxiety. My boy, Thomas, he's sick, she whispered, her hands twisting in her apron. The fever, it's the water. The doctor says it's tainted, getting worse every day. Half the children in town are ill. She pressed a small, heavy pouch of coins into Eleanor's hand. I heard the whispers. I know you're fighting Kane. Her eyes pleaded with an intensity that startled Eleanor. Take my horse. She's sturdy, faster than that old nag of Arthur's. Do this for our children, Miss Vance. You're the only one brave enough. This quiet act of rebellion, this mother's desperate plea, solidified Eleanor's resolve. This was no longer just about justice for Arthur or Silas's father. It was about the lives of innocent children. They rode out under the cover of a cloudy sky, the sturdy mare a godsend. The surveyor's deposition was wrapped in oilcloth and sewn into the lining of Eleanor's saddlebag. They avoided the main roads, Silas guiding them through a network of canyons and dry riverbeds he knew from his youth. But Kane was a step ahead. The ambush came in a narrow pass, the crack of a rifle echoing off the canyon walls. A bullet tore through the cantle of Eleanor's saddle, another kicking up dust just inches from the mare's hooves. Ride! Silas yelled, firing his own rifle back at their unseen attackers. A chaotic chase ensued. They galloped through the treacherous terrain, bullets whining past them. Silas, with his innate knowledge of the land, was a phantom, drawing their fire, leading them on a wild chase. But their luck ran out when a bullet found its mark in the soft flesh of the mare's flank. The horse screamed, stumbling, and went down, sending Eleanor tumbling to the rocky ground. Silas was at her side in an instant, helping her up, his face a mask of grim determination. Are you hurt? Just scrapes, she gasped, her arm bleeding from a long gash where she'd hit the ground. The horse. There was no time. The sounds of their pursuers grew closer. Abandoning the mortally wounded animal, they scrambled down a steep ravine, rocks skittering under their feet, and found refuge in a shallow overhang as dusk began to fall. They were on foot, miles from Silver Creek, and hunted. Night fell, bringing a chill that seeped into their bones. They huddled together for warmth in the dark, the sounds of Kane's men searching the ridge above them a constant, terrifying reminder of their predicament. The adrenaline of the chase faded, replaced by a cold, gnawing fear. They won't give up, Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Neither will we, Silas countered, his voice a low, steady anchor in the darkness. He took a strip of cloth from his shirt and gently began to clean the gash on her arm. His touch was practical, surprisingly gentle, his calloused fingers sending a jolt of warmth through her that had nothing to do with the cold. I'm sorry, she murmured. I got you into this. You didn't, he replied, his focus on the wound. This fight started long before you arrived. You just gave it a name. He finished tying the makeshift bandage, his hand lingering for a moment on her arm. In the close confines of their hiding place, she could feel the heat of him, see the quiet intensity in his eyes. I was beginning to think there was no justice left in this world, he said, his voice barely audible above the chirping of crickets. Just power and greed. You reminded me that one person's courage can make a difference. I'm not courageous, she confessed, the fear and exhaustion making her honest. I'm terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Eleanor, he said, using her first name for the first time. It's acting in spite of it. The words, his quiet strength, the simple human contact in the face of death, broke through the last of her reserves. A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. He reached out, his thumb gently wiping it away. It was a gesture of profound intimacy, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had been forged between them in the heat of the forge and the fire of the chase. It was in that moment, trapped and facing the real possibility of death, that they heard the voices of Cain's men directly above them, their boots crunching on the gravel at the ravine's edge. They were cornered. Silas drew his knife, the faint moonlight glinting on the steel. He positioned himself in front of Eleanor, a silent protector ready to make a final, desperate stand. Just as a figure appeared at the edge of the ravine, silhouetted against the starry sky, a single, unexpected rifle shot cracked through the night. It came not from below, but from the opposite ridge. The figure cried out, clutching his chest, and tumbled silently into the darkness. Help, improbable and unknown, had just announced its arrival. The rifle shot echoed through the ravine, a sharp, definitive sound that sent Cain's men scrambling for cover. In the ensuing confusion, Silas seized the opportunity. Now, he urged, grabbing Eleanor's hand and pulling her deeper into the shadows of the ravine, away from the chaos. They moved quickly, their escape covered by the shouts and panicked movements of their pursuers. A second shot rang out from the ridge, kicking up dirt near another of Cain's men, confirming their savior was not a lucky accident but a deliberate intervention. They didn't stop running until the sounds of the conflict had faded behind them, replaced by the pounding of their own hearts. They found refuge in a dense thicket of mesquite, their lungs burning, their bodies screaming with exhaustion. A figure emerged from the darkness, rifle held at a low ready. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. It was Sheriff Thompson. He wasn't there as an enemy. His face, illuminated by a sliver of moon, was a mask of grim resolve. Figured you two could use a hand, he said, his voice raspy. You shot at your own allies, Silas stated, his tone a mixture of suspicion and disbelief. They stopped being my allies when my granddaughter took sick, Thompson said, the words heavy with a grief that felt raw and new. The doctor said it's the water. Cain's greed is killing our children. I've been a coward for a long time, Silas. I let him blackmail me, let him cover up Arthur's murder. I won't let him kill my family. It was a confession born of desperation, a last-ditch effort to reclaim some piece of his own soul. He didn't have the power to stop Cain in redemption, but he could buy them a chance to find someone who did. He'll hunt you for this, Eleanor warned. Let him, the sheriff said with a fatalistic shrug. He unstrapped a canteen from his belt and offered it to her. I'm a dead man either way. At least this way, I choose the reason. He gave them his horse, a rangy roan built for endurance. There's a hidden trail over that next ridge. It's an old cattle run. It'll cut a day off your ride to Silver Creek. He looked between the two of them, a flicker of something like respect in his tired eyes. You'd better ride hard. My intervention won't hold them for long. The journey to Silver Creek was a grueling race against time. They rode with little rest, the sheriff's sacrifice a constant, pressing weight on their minds. They arrived at dawn on the second day, a vision of civilization after the unforgiving wilderness. Silver Creek was a bustling town with a telegraph office, a proper hotel, and the unmistakable presence of federal law. They found Marshal Garrett in the town's small courthouse, a grizzled veteran with eyes that had seen every form of human depravity and were rarely surprised. He listened to their story without interruption, his face a stony mask of neutrality. He had already heard from Cain's telegraph messages, a tale of a conniving woman and a half-breed outlaw who had stolen proprietary documents and murdered one of his men in their escape. He's a powerful man, Mr. Cain, Garrett said when they had finished, his voice a low rumble. Has friends in the territorial government. Eleanor's heart sank. After everything they had endured, they would be dismissed, disbelieved. But, the marshal continued, leaning forward, he's also a sloppy one. He tapped a finger on the surveyor's deposition, which Eleanor had placed on his desk. I've seen this kind of fraud before. Thorne, the surveyor. He testified in another case for me last year. A coward, but his documentation is meticulous. He then examined Arthur's letter, his eyes narrowing at the biblical reference. And this, he said, a hint of admiration in his voice, is clever. A dead man's testimony. He stood, his decision made. I believe you. The 3 words were the most beautiful Eleanor had ever heard. But belief isn't enough. We need to secure the evidence at the spring and confront Cain on his own ground. He looked at Silas, a new respect in his gaze. I've heard of you. They say you can track a shadow across bare rock. He unpinned a simple tin star from his own vest and tossed it to Silas. Consider yourself deputized. Your knowledge of that land is worth more than a dozen of my men. For the first time since she had met him, Eleanor saw Silas truly stunned. He stared at the star in his palm as if it were a foreign object, the weight of its authority an unfamiliar sensation after a lifetime of being outside the law. As they rode back towards redemption, now part of a federal posse, a new sense of hope surged through Eleanor. The balance of power had shifted. They were no longer the hunted, they were the hunters. But as they crested the final ridge overlooking the valley where the town lay, that hope turned to horror. A column of black smoke coiled into the sky, thick and angry. Cain, realizing that the law was closing in, had chosen the scorched earth option. He couldn't have the town, so he was destroying it. The most intense part of the blaze was centered exactly where her heart had just started to build a home. The blacksmith shop was on fire. The race back to redemption was a desperate, thundering charge into a vision of hell. Flames, hungry and orange, devoured the dry timber of the town, painting the sky with smoke and ash. At the heart of the inferno was the blacksmith shop, Eleanor's home. Arthur's legacy was being consumed, its sturdy frame collapsing into a roaring pyre. Cain and his last loyal men were making their final, nihilistic stand, using the chaos of the fire as a weapon and a diversion. He's trying to burn the evidence and everyone who's seen it, Garrett yelled over the roar of the flames and the panicked shouts of the townspeople. Silas, take 2 men, circle around the back. Cut off their escape route to the river. We'll push in from the front. Silas, the tin star, a glint of order amidst the chaos, simply nodded. For the first time in his life, he was not an outcast but a leader, his skills in service of the very law that had for so long been his oppressor. He moved with a speed and certainty that was breathtaking, disappearing into the smoke with his small posse. The town square was a maelstrom of fire and fear. Cain's men, their faces demonic in the flickering light, fired sporadically from behind overturned wagons. But Eleanor's attention was fixed on the church. Its steeple, a beacon of hope in this dusty land, was now threatened by a shower of embers from the burning smithy next door. She could see the terrified faces of women and children crowded in the doorway, among them the doctor's wife, her sick child in her arms. While the marshal's men engaged the gunmen, Eleanor acted. Her world had been the forge, her tools the hammer and tongs. She knew metal, she knew leverage. The town's main water cistern, a large iron tank used for emergencies, stood near the church, its outflow valve secured with a heavy, rusted padlock. Men were already there, struggling with it futilely. Get me a crowbar, she yelled, her voice cutting through the din. Someone thrust the heavy iron bar into her hands. Ignoring the heat and the smoke that stunned her eyes, she jammed the tip of the crowbar into the lock's hasp. This was her work. This was the language she understood. With a blacksmith's focused strength, she put her weight into it, using the leverage just as her father had taught her. The rusted metal groaned, resisted, and then, with a sharp crack, shattered. Water, precious and life-giving, gushed forth. The townspeople, galvanized by her action, formed a bucket brigade, their fear momentarily replaced by a unified purpose. They were no longer just victims. They were fighting back. The final confrontation came, fittingly, in the heart of the fire. As the tide of the gunfight turned, Cain, seeing his power crumbling to ash, made a final, desperate move. He cornered Eleanor by the collapsing wall of the smithy, his face a mask of crazed fury, a pistol in his hand. "This is your fault, you interfering bitch," he snarled, raising the gun. "If I'm burning, you're burning with me." A single shot cracked through the air, but it wasn't from Cain's pistol. He staggered, a look of shocked disbelief on his face, as a dark stain spread across his chest. He collapsed into the dust, his reign of terror over. Eleanor looked up to see Sheriff Thompson leaning against the frame of the general store, his own gun smoking in his hand. A dark patch was spreading on his side, and he slid slowly to the ground. Eleanor rushed to his side. He had been a weak man, a corrupt man, but in his final moments, he had chosen a side. "My girl," he gasped, his eyes pleading. "Tell her He couldn't finish. He died there, in the dust of the town he had failed and ultimately, in his own way, saved. The fires were doused by morning, leaving behind a scarred but not broken town. The marshal and his men rounded up Kane's surviving hands. The surveyor's deposition, which Eleanor had entrusted to Garrett, ensured that the full weight of federal law would descend upon Kane's corrupt empire. The illegal deeds were voided, the water rights restored to the town. Eleanor stood in the smoking ruins of the blacksmith shop. The quench trough she and Silas had built was gone. The tools her father had given her were melted and warped. But as she sifted through the ashes, her fingers found something hard and misshapen. It was the heat-fused metal of Arthur's Bible, the physical proof of his secret now gone, but its purpose fulfilled. She had kept her promise. Months later, spring rains fell on Redemption, washing the ash from the streets and breathing life back into the parched land. The river, fed once more by the sacred spirit spring, flowed clear and strong. The town was rebuilding, not just its structures, but its spirit. The blacksmith shop was the first to rise from the ashes, built with the help of grateful townspeople. It was hers now, truly hers, not by contract, but by courage. Silas, his name cleared and his status transformed from outcast to town hero, worked alongside her. He had been appointed the official guardian of the restored Comanche lands around the spring, his heritage finally honored. But his chosen place was here, with her. They stood together one evening on the porch of the new smithy, the sound of children's laughter carrying on the breeze from the town square. The sick had recovered, the land was healing. He took her hand, his calloused palm fitting perfectly against hers. It wasn't a dramatic declaration, but a quiet certainty, a promise of a shared future. A family forged not of paper contracts or shared blood, but of mutual respect, of a trust tested in fire and found to be as strong as the steel on her anvil. The water, which had been the blood on a dead man's hands, was now the water of life, for the town, and for them. And in the rhythmic clang of Eleanor's hammer, ringing out in the clear Texas air, was the sound of a new beginning, a redemption earned not by prayer, but by the unwavering strength of a woman who refused to let her fire go cold.